Well, good morning. Let's all say bye, students. Hey, Kaylee. Hey, Piper. Thank you so much for the marble jar. There are exactly 200 marbles in this jar, I've been told. That's not really relevant, but they counted, which was sweet of them. We'll come back to this in a little bit. My name's Dan, and I'm delighted to be with you today. If you happen to be our guest, thank you so much for venturing out in the wind and the cold to come see us and be with us at Calvary. You are now our friend, so you don't need to worry about where you stand. You fit right in. We're glad you're here. I want to talk about a couple of things going on in the life of our church that have gone on just before I get into my message, things I'm really excited about, like Trunk or Treat that happened just 2 weeks ago. Guys, it was amazing. I think one of my favorite things was seeing so many of you who have made Calvary home in like the last 12 or even 6 to 18 months that came out to do trunks and to have fun with our community. That was beautiful. We welcomed over 450 kids that night, which is really cool. Yeah. And to all of you who gave candy, I want to say a personal thank you, because Mike and Angel and those who were passing candy out found out I liked Almond Joys, which Brad told you last week he does not like, and I got like 50 of them hidden around my office. So it's like Christmas came early. This is wonderful. So Trunk or Treat was really cool. We're going to use that opportunity to invite those families to join us for Christmas and invite those children to join us for Vacation Bible School, because we enjoyed having them as much as they enjoyed being here. Another thing that's going on that I'm just thrilled about, and I'm so grateful, the folks that lead our food pantry, knowing that many in our community are at a moment where food is a little bit harder to come by. We've actually seen an uptick all fall in the use of our food pantry. And so they put out a request on social media. In church, you have responded so big. We've filled up not just the food pantry shelves, but an office space across the hall to make sure that no one in our community goes hungry in these weeks. Really well done, church. And then this is part thank you to our elders, but also part excitement. I don't know if you got to read the weekend email, but the elders have really wanted to make sure that they share what they're working on with you, church, and they were excited to announce that a lead pastor search team has been put together and is getting oriented this coming week. So what a great progress, and you gentlemen, thank you guys so much for everything you're doing. All right, today we are going to be in Philippians chapter 2. We're studying the book of Philippians this month of November. We're asking the question, what happens in my life if I let God encourage me? What happens if I let encouragement shape and form me? And last week, Brad shared something incredibly beautiful that I needed to hear. He said, we need encouragement because we're so aware of discouragement. Discouragement usually comes when we expect one kind of story and life seems to be writing another. For Christians who anchor ourselves in God's story, we often expect things to go better or easier, and yet life can be hard, and it appears we find out God is writing a different kind of story that we didn't expect. And the encouragement we found in Philippians 1 is this: God isn't finished with you. God isn't finished with me. You and I don't have to be perfect. You and I don't have to try harder. We don't have to achieve and produce more, because God isn't finished with us. He's working in us, through us, and for us. And I love the way Brad pointed this out. He said, when we look at Philippians, we see God wasn't finished for Paul. God wasn't finished for the Philippians. And so we understand God isn't finished for you or for me. God's not done with any of us. That beautiful encouragement has sunk into my heart. And so as we move into Philippians 2, I hope that we come to understand what it is that God is doing in us. If He's not done, what is it He's up to? What is it we might look for and be encouraged to expect will happen in us? Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13 gives us a clue. The Apostle Paul writes this: work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and to work for His good pleasure. What does working out our salvation have to do with God's good pleasure is the question. It's the thing that pops up to the surface, because if we're encouraged that God's not done, and yet we're still supposed to work out our own salvation, like what's going on there? Are we now supposed to work? Were we duped? Is it the opposite? Or is there a relationship between God working in us and us working out our salvation? I think it has to do with how we think, how we remember, how we carry the good news about Jesus, about God, about ourselves, and about each other. Philippians 2, chapter 5 suggests it has something to do with the mind of Christ. Philippians 2:5 says that you have the mind of Christ if you want it. If I were to pick a single word, I think what we're playing in the ballpark of today is humility. And so we're going to talk about humility and hopefully reflect and invite Jesus to teach us about humility today. I've been asking myself all week, what is humility, really? Is it being 16 and your parents say, Danny, we're going to get you a car, but it's going to be a 1993 Ford Festiva? No, actually, that's a wonderful gift to have the chance to have a car when you're 16. Is it being 5 foot 6.5 inches tall and not rounding up in public? I'm asking for a friend. Or is it nailing a project at work but turning down the accolades and the praise when someone says, you did great, and you said, oh, no, don't. Is that humility? Is humility when we can't help but feel down on ourselves? Or is humility something more elusive, like a fragrance or like a pleasant breeze? Something that shines when it's there and glares when it's not. Yogi Berra, the baseball player, the St. Louisan, he said, it ain't the heat, it's the humility. I know, I don't get it either. Most things Yogi Berra said I'm still chewing on, but I think there's something profound there. So yeah, I don't really fully understand humility, if I'm being honest. I was hoping we might learn together today. And I can tell you that what I do understand about humility is that Bob's life was changed by Randy's. And Bob tells this story pretty willingly. His life was changed when Randy said to him, Bob, I'm with you. You see, Bob at about age 17 was kind of aimless, felt kind of done with high school. This is what he writes about himself. He said, at the beginning of my junior year in high school, I decided it was time to leave high school and make the move to Yosemite. I had a down vest, 2 red bandanas, a pair of rock climbing shoes, $75, and a VW Bug. What else did I need? So he showed up at his friend Randy's house. Randy was a little bit older. Randy had been showing up at the high school because of his involvement in a group called Young Life, and he was looking for chances to talk to teenagers about Jesus. And Bob thought enough of Randy to think that before I leave town, I should swing by and tell Randy, thanks for being a good friend. Knocked on Randy's door. And after delivering the news, he says that Randy disappeared for a few minutes into his house. And when he came back to the door, he had a tattered backpack hanging over his shoulder and a sleeping bag under his other arm. And all he said was this, Bob, I'm with you. If you wouldn't mind, what if I caught a ride with you? I can find my way back after you get to Yosemite and get settled in. And Randy climbed in the passenger seat of Bob's Bug. They traveled to Yosemite. At Yosemite, Bob says, I applied to nearly every business in that valley and struck out every time. There were simply no jobs available and no hope of one opening up soon. After less than 3 days of an attempt, Bob had to realize that his dream was not going to succeed. So he said this to his friend. You know, Randy, you've been great coming with me and everything, but it looks like I'm striking out. I think what I'll do is head back and I'll finish up high school. And he says, after a short pause, Randy said again, man, whatever you decide, just know that either way, I'm with you, Bob. I can tell that he was with me in spirit just as much as with his presence. I wasn't a project, Bob says. I was Randy's friend. I wondered if maybe all Christians operated this way. When they left, they drove several hours home. Bob remembers, we didn't talk much as we left Yosemite Valley, or for much of the way home for that matter. A dream of mine had just checked into hospice. Every once in a while, Randy would check in on me from the passenger seat, and he would ask, "Hey, how are you doing, Bob?" And then back at Randy's, where the whole adventure started, they went inside, and when they went inside, Bob said he noticed that there were some like half-opened gifts all around the house. And he thought, oh, maybe Randy just had a birthday. But then he noticed there was a half-opened microwave as a gift and thought that's a really strange way to celebrate being born. And then the girl that he knew as Randy's girlfriend came around the corner and said, "Welcome home, honey." And Bob says this, "I felt both sick and choked up in an instant. I realized these were wedding presents on the floor. Randy and his girlfriend had just gotten married. When I knocked on Randy's door on that Sunday morning, Randy didn't just see a high school kid who had disrupted the beginning of his marriage. He saw a kid who was about to jump the tracks. He saw the need, and he did something about it. He didn't just say he was for me or with me. He was actually present with me. What I learned from Randy changed my view permanently about what it meant to have a friendship with Jesus. Perhaps that's why Jesus is sometimes called Emmanuel, which means God with us. I think that's what God had in mind, for Jesus to be present, to just be with us. It's also what he has in mind for us when it comes to other people. Humility, it turns out, is the calculus that's involved in transformative human relationships. Humility is what it takes to really make a difference in someone else's life at a heart level. And it's very hard to understand, except for by example. Now, as examples go, I can hardly believe this story. I couldn't imagine getting married and the next day following a teenager on a bad idea. But maybe my imagination just hasn't grown enough. Now, I'd encourage you to read this story for yourself, and actually several like it, in a book by Bob Goff called Love Does. It came out in 2012, but I think it's a book we still need today. Because I think we tell ourselves, we imagine for ourselves love that's too small, humility that's too restricted. And I think what Bob Goff offers in his book is a bigger and a better dream. You know, why would Randy do that? If you don't protect yourself, won't you get taken advantage of? Won't your own needs go unmet? If you don't promote yourself, will you not get ahead? I don't know really the answers fully to those questions. I'd like to say they're a simple, you don't need to worry about those things, but I mean, we all worry about those things. I just think the thing we have to see is that self-centeredness will destroy relationships and shred integrity, personal integrity, while humility will build up relationships and establish integrity. It's part of the way this world that God made works. And before we get into the scriptures and we talk more about humility and the way it plays out in our lives, I feel compelled. I want to say something direct about our culture today as it relates to humility. I think that most of us in this room, and myself included, like the idea of humility quite a lot. But we're a little tone deaf to understanding how frequently humility gets rejected outright in our current culture. Not in like Hollywood culture, but in like St. Charles County culture. Because, at least for me, like I have a hard time believing that power really is a corrupting kind of force. Power sounds like a really nice thing to have on your side. I think that celebrity seems like a really useful tool. Having a big following or being an influencer, surely something good can come out of that. And while I'm not saying nothing good can come out of that, I do think we have to take notice of what happens in the heart and mind of someone who pursues the goal of celebrity or pursues the goal of power. Rarely humility goes along for the ride. You know, I think sometimes even just when it comes to just working hard and doing what life requires can even deceive us. You know, we might say to ourselves, look, my stock options aren't as lucrative as my friends or my boss at work, and so I'd better keep storing up. My focus actually can't be on giving away right now because someone else has more than me. And in each of these things, when it comes to power or celebrity or security, as Americans, we're more likely to excuse ourselves in those ways of thinking rather than to invite humility to really work down deep and shift our perspective. I don't think humble people wind up insecure. I don't think they wind up with no power or with no influence. But I do think it takes the work of the gospel in our heart to help us see the differences. I also think that sometimes as Christians in America, we're more likely to think that humility will come from what we consume rather than invite us to sit with the discomfort of not really getting humility on a personally relevant level to begin with. It's easier to opt into a Bible study than it is to look in the mirror. It's easier to read a good book, like Love does, it's great, than it is to look at your children or your spouse and wonder, do they feel love from me? As Christians, humility comes with our welcome packet. It's built into the gospel, but it doesn't come to us as an action item. It comes to us like a language we're invited to learn. And this is where Bob Goff concluded his story about his adventure with Randy. He said this, "The world can make you think that love can be picked up at a garage sale or enveloped in a Hallmark card. But the kind of love that God created and demonstrated is a costly one because it involves sacrifice and presence. It's a love that operates more like a sign language than being spoken outright. What I learned reinforced the simple truth that continues to weave itself into the tapestry of every great story. Love does." And I think the first century letter to the Philippians, to the believers at Philippi, is a primer on joy and a study and encouragement, and wants us to think in those terms. Wants us to ask ourselves, have we learned the language of humility yet? Do we know what it means that love does? Now, to help you in this series, if you want it, we have at the big desk available these scripture journals. They're really handy tools. It's just the letter to the Philippians, and on every other page is a space for notes. Feel free to pick one up anytime throughout this series. We're going to start diving into Philippians 2 at this point this morning. And the question for us that Philippians 2 helps us with is, how do I learn the language of humility? I think that, according to Philippians, humility is the product of an encouraged life. I think your humility starts the day that you internalize the reality that God's not done with you. God's still working for His glory and your good in your life. And it begs the question, if God's not done with me, well, then what is He up to? When we look into Philippians 2, we're going to see that it's set up like a sandwich. There's some practical stuff, then there's this meat in the middle, and then more practical stuff. We're going to start with the meat in the middle. So if you would, please go with me to Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. We're going to see what it is that God's been up to and how that applies to ourselves and what it is He wants to do in us. So Philippians 2, 5 through 11 says this, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though He was in the form of God, Jesus did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied Himself, and taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men and women, and being found in human form, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted Him and bestowed on Him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, and that is to the glory of God the Father." Jesus sets the tone of the language we are to learn. I want to read for you what Jason Meyer in a commentary wrote, because he says it better than me. He said the verb that we just read in there, humbled, I think it's verse 8, he humbled himself. The verb humbled is striking because it was frequently used in reference to slaves and their loss of prestige or status in the first century world. Jesus is the model of the low-minded humility that Paul had called for earlier in chapter 2. A proud person would protest that some low position was beneath him or her. Now catch this. Jesus displayed his humility by not regarding anything as beneath him. How does one become humble in that way? A long time ago, somebody asked the great preacher Martin Lloyd-Jones this very question. And here's what Martin Lloyd-Jones said. A friend was asking me the other day, how can I be humble? He felt there was pride in himself, and he wanted to know how to get rid of it. He seemed to think that I had some patent remedy and could tell him, do this, that, and the other, and you will become humble. But I said, I have no method or technique. I can't tell you to get down on your knees and believe in prayer, because I know that you will soon be proud of that. There's only one way to be humble. There's only one way to be humble, and that is to look into the face of Jesus Christ. You cannot be anything else when you see him. You cannot be anything else but humble when you understand who Jesus is and what it is he's done for us. That is the only way. Humility is not something you can create within yourself. Rather, you look at him. You realize who he is and what he has done, and you are humbled. You see, this is how we cultivate humility out of an encouraged heart. We look to Jesus. We start with Jesus. And in starting with Jesus, humility begins to grow. In fact, I think looking at Jesus is so necessary, I'm willing to say this. Your humility and mine will never rise above your grasp of the gospel. Your humility will never rise above your grasp of the gospel. My humility will never rise above my understanding of who Jesus is and what he has done. And this is, I think, how Paul can say in his letter, yours is the mind of Christ if you want it. Because what Jesus has done and who Jesus is written for us to digest, to internalize, to accept, to believe. It's like an operating system update. Yeah, your operating system is getting you through the week. But sometimes a good update changes the way the whole week functions. And allowing your understanding of the gospel to become the bedrock of your identity is quite a change. You see, when we start with Jesus, then we move outward. Jesus, understanding the gospel, is what goes on the inside, and because it's going on the inside, it allows us to move outward into our world in a way that humility delights to trust God and to bless others. That's what we learn from the gospel that we internalize and now externalize. When we are understanding the gospel, we can lean into our life, blessing God and others. I say this because of the hamburger buns on the sandwich, because of what Paul wrote before and after the section we just read. Let's take a look. Philippians chapter 2, 1 through 5 says this, be of one mind. So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, which the reason he's saying if is to make sure everyone who hears this letter says, yeah, I've experienced a little bit of that at least. So everyone is brought to this point of verse 2 where he says, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. Humility delights to bless others. Humility delights to see the best in others. Humility delights to set aside ambition and conceit, no matter how natural those things come, because humility has learned that we're involved in the great story God is writing through Jesus. This is so central to what Paul is telling the people who first got this letter. Because when you go to chapter 4, verse 2, you'll see the Apostle Paul writing to friends. He says, please talk to Euodia and Syntyche. I know those names are weird. But he says, please talk to them and remind them to agree with each other in the Lord. Apparently, sometimes it can be just as hard to go to church today as it was back then. And yet, the Apostle Paul, in a moment of vulnerability, says, listen, the gospel is at stake in how we choose to bless others. Our understanding of the gospel is shown through our humility. So that's the top half of the hamburger bun. Here's the bottom half. Right after the Apostle Paul talks about everything Jesus did in the mind of Christ, he says we're to live without complaining or arguing. Take a look at verses 12 and following. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Internalize the gospel to the point that it externalizes in action. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. It's like what the Apostle John wrote in his letter when he said, what is the work of God? It's to believe in Jesus. You are to internalize the good news of Jesus to the point that it externalizes itself in your actions. He goes on and says, do all things without grumbling or disputing. I don't like that verse. I'm going to complain about it right here, right now. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I didn't run in vain or labor in vain. Again, the Apostle Paul is talking to them as a church he was deeply invested in. Here's what I want to pull out from this section, aside from the obvious. Complaining and arguing don't really have much to do or anything to do with humility. The part of the verses, I think it's verse 15 and 16, where it talks about shining like lights and more. There's like 5 different Old Testament allusions that the Apostle Paul weaves into that sentence. And it's like he's telling them, he's reminding them that this concept of humility is the fulfillment of Old Testament promises. You see, when our attitude is to bless God and others, we shine like stars in a very dark sky. And that's a promise that God gave to his people centuries before. That because of his work in them, that they might shine like stars. Do everything without complaining or arguing. It's not just a nice meme or a good psychological thought, my friend. It is the outward expression of your internalizing the good news of Jesus. Think about it like a diagnostic. The more I complain and the more I argue, the less I'm comprehending the gospel in that moment. The more I'm self-centered or conceited, focused on myself, and the less unity I practice, the less gospel I'm comprehending in that situation. Now, that diagnostic doesn't really help me know exactly what to do except for to look back at Jesus and pick up where I got off track to begin with. Who is Jesus? What did he do, and what has he called us to? Gospel humility goes to the same place in my heart that complaining comes from, and it heals the twist. It straightens out what circumstance or mentoring or my own selfish heart twisted. The good news of Jesus straightens that out to where I realize I don't need to complain to be heard. I don't need to argue to get my way. I can be present and I can seek the best for others while trusting God for the best for myself. You see, when you begin to understand the gospel, you are freed up to live from a generous and brave place, engaging with the God's not done story only he can write in your life. When we start with Jesus and we move outward generously, which is like the only other option if you're not complaining or arguing. You got to do something with all that energy. So you move outward generously, like the gospel itself. Humility doesn't lead you to lose your marbles. It leads you to give them away. We often think that the hard circumstances in life and the difficult relationships we face are going to make us crazy. The reality is, they're going to allow us a context to live humbly. We don't have to lose our marbles if we gladly give them away. I want to borrow something I saw. It was online. A friend shared it with me. But I want to borrow an illustration from Brené Brown. It was brilliant. She was talking about trust and the way trust works between people. And she said that trust is like marbles in a jar. And so often we feel like if our jar is adequately full of marbles, we really need to protect our marbles. Because if we start giving away too many, then our jar might not be full. And then we might not have what we need. But her point was that no one's jar gets filled up except that somebody takes the time to take a marble out of their own and to put it in yours. And that action of taking something you could rightfully hold on to and giving it to another, maybe it's a compliment, or maybe it's remembering what someone's going through. Maybe it's offering to show up like Randy did for Bob. That action of depositing a marble in somebody else's jar, it builds trust. And trust is the playground on which change has a field day. So I don't know what you're going through that requires humility today. Maybe it's your son or your daughter that's just not, moving forward in life in the way that you know they could. Don't lose your marbles. Find a way to give them away. Maybe it's the coworker that really doesn't even belong on the team because they're just not keeping up right now. Maybe rather than giving yourself an excuse to reject them, marginalize them, or flip out on them, maybe you can shine like a light in their dark sky and find a way to encourage or to love them. Put marbles in their jar and see how humility does its work. And then second, I would say that when we start with Jesus and we move outward, we don't just move outward generously, we move outward bravely. It's like somebody who normally, you guys know what snowbirding is, right? Missouri people who have sense and money leave when the weather starts getting bad, right? Well, there are a few crazy people who are in Florida during the hot months and come this way during the winter months. Maybe it's for family, maybe it's for heritage, maybe they lost their marbles, I don't know. When we start with Jesus and we move outward, we do so bravely in a way that someone reverse snowbirds, moving from better weather to worse weather. Here's how I would say it. I wanted to maybe leave something with you that might stick in your mind. So borrowing what we see in Jesus, I would say this: humility is the journey from residing in heaven to vacationing on earth. It's actually what Philippians 2 tells us Jesus did. He had residence in heaven. He had a right to be in the presence of God in a very fulfilling, complete, and entirely eternal way. And yet he didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped. So he packed his bags and he went on vacation where the weather was quite worse. And the people didn't use deodorant. I don't know why I said that. I thought it'd be funny. My bad. I'm still like a sophomore. I just haven't grown out of it. You deserve better than the difficult and obnoxious people that you live next to or that live in the same house. And the people in your house deserve better than the difficult and obnoxious person that I can sometimes be. But humility is going on the journey from residing in heaven to vacationing on earth. Humility is not looking for what you deserve, but for looking what you can do. Humility is not saying, y'all need to get better. Humility is saying, I'm glad I'm here, even though it does confuse me. And this is baked into Philippians as well. You see, at the end of chapter 1, before we got into the sandwich, the Apostle Paul told them this. He said, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or I'm absent, I will hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction. Destruction means their distance from the gospel. This is a clear sign to them, but of your salvation, and that your salvation is from God. Verse 29, hear this, for it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. Engaged in the same conflict you saw I had, and now here I still have. Remember that the Apostle Paul, when he's writing this, is doing so from a prison. An unfair prison. People were trying to make his imprisonment worse. They were trying to exploit every weakness in Paul in order to make his suffering greater. And Paul says to his friends that it's okay to take a journey from residing where you deserve to vacationing where you never deserved to be. I think he says this, suffer as a saint. The capitalization on this is not a mistake, by the way. Your sainthood, your belonging to Jesus, your being involved in the good news is the capital letter of your entire life. Your difficulty, your suffering is the lowercase letter. Because your circumstances will always change and adapt. But your sainthood is rooted in Jesus. So you can do hard things, my friend. You can love your enemy. You can love your neighbor. Beth Moore said it well when she said, we must settle in our hearts that no matter what, God is sovereign. That's one of the moves Jesus made. He settled in his heart that God the Father held the master plan. So he packed his bags and he moved. I'm about to land this plane, but I do want to tell you a little bit more about this text. The word humble that I talked about earlier, it's really interesting in the Greek. When you do a word study on it, you see that in the New Testament, sometimes it means humble, sometimes it means humble-ish, which is a fascinating distinction. You see, in the one hand, humble, like we're talking about today, talks about allowing yourself or lowering yourself for the good of another. And then the humble-ish was this idea of like, well, you guys all have bumped into false humility, right? Oh, woe is me. I work so hard. Oh, I try so hard for them. Oh, I do this. Oh, I do that. This other humble-ish word is best translated into English asceticism, which is a way of looking at life that says, I'm going to self-impose difficulties so people think that I really have the stuff that it takes to live, that I'm really tough and courageous, that I'm really a generous person. Asceticism is more about the way others perceive you than you'll ever understand if you're caught up in it. Humility is more about how you perceive yourself, understanding who you are in Jesus, and living from that place. And I'm going to borrow from C.S. Lewis when I say the trouble with false humility, the trouble with being humble-ish, the trouble with having kind of an ascetic mindset where you're like, I just want everyone else to see how hard I got it. C.S. Lewis says, now the trouble about trying to make yourself stupider than you really are is that you very often succeed. Hey friend, you don't have to torture yourself. You don't have to embarrass yourself. You don't have to put yourself down. You don't have to do anything that would be falsely humble. What you got to do is you got to look at the gospel and see Jesus and understand him. And when you understand him, like feeling the love of God is the first move in humility. It's actually a very uplifting thing. We Christians ought to be some of the strongest in the whole culture because of this dynamic of humility. I like what Charles Spurgeon said when he wrote, think not that humility is weakness. It shall supply the marrow of strength to thy bones. Stoop and conquer. Bow thyself and become invincible. This mind of Christ is yours in him. Here's what you gain when you cultivate humility. When you cultivate humility, gospel humility, when you look at the face of Jesus and the work of Jesus and you internalize it to the point it externalizes itself, you will gain contentment and integrity, which are the true markers of personal growth. When you cultivate humility, you will gain community. Every place that it says you in Philippians 2, to my knowledge, should be translated y'all. When you cultivate humility, you gain community. So not only do you have something to gain personally by allowing the gospel to transform you, we have something to gain here by allowing the gospel to continue to transform us. And church, I want to just encourage you in this. That's why I love Calvary. I've been more encouraged by the gospel in you and expressed by you than anywhere else I've experienced in my 43 years of life. Thank you for that. But let's not stop with what we've done. Let's press forward to see where Jesus would take us if we'll look deeper into his eyes. And the third thing you gain when you cultivate humility is witness. Again, it's like a language or a fragrance or a gentle breeze. Your neighbor, your coworker, your family member might not understand your humility. They don't need to understand why you do what you do, except for the bridge that helps them to hear the gospel. But by being and living humble, you will earn the right to express the gospel. I am confident of that. I promise you that. You will gain a witness as you cultivate humility. So let's go all the way back to where we started. Your humility and mine can only rise to the level that we understand, that we comprehend, that we grasp and hold on to the good news about Jesus. So let's conclude our time here by comprehending him. Let's just focus on Jesus. We're going to share communion to do that. Now, if you didn't grab communion on your way in, here's what I want you to know. If you're a believer in Jesus, even if that started 10 minutes ago, we want you to participate with us in communion. Our ushers are actually walking around. If you need a communion cup right now, just slip your hand up. They'd be glad to get you one. Thank you guys and gals for serving this way. When you get your communion, go ahead and open the top. Take out the bread. The bread reminds us that Jesus, in heading to the cross, he said, at a meal with bread, he said, hey, to his friends, take and eat, this is my body, and it's broken for you. And he gave us a pattern to comprehend him, that we would understand his humility, that he might grow in us his love. I want to quote something to you that just, again, it just says it better than me, so I want to share Jason Meyer's words one more time. But I want you to look at the bread while you listen to these words. Meditate much on the cross. Behold how the lowest point of Christ's descent displayed the highest peak of his love. Jesus went from the highest place of heavenly blessing to the lowest place of earthly curse, to death on a cross. Why did he have to go so low? He had to come to where we were in order to rescue us. If someone falls into a pit, it does no good to meet him halfway. Our rescue from sin and death required Jesus to go all the way down to where we were, enslaved in complete condemnation. The Son of God left the courts of heaven and laid aside his crown to bear the dreadful curse on the cross. And so we hear Jesus' words echo in our hearts. This is my body. If you're comfortable, would you break that bread, remembering his body was broken for you? And would you eat, considering how low he came to rescue each of us? And then you take the juice and you gently peel back that top layer of foil. And we remember not just that Jesus died, but Jesus set up our entire future by spilling his blood. He told the same friends at the same table over the same meal, he said, "This is the cup of the new covenant made in my blood. Do this in remembrance of me." As we drink today, what we are remembering is that our relationship with Jesus was worked by his own action and held by his own faithfulness. You, my friend, even if you've gotten off track, you don't have to get saved all over again. You just have to re-engage the salvation he's given you. If If you've been distracted all week and you haven't been looking at Jesus, today will you look deeply into this good news, and will you drink and comprehend the gospel? Let's drink together. We want to move from this part of our service into an opportunity to sing, and it's an opportunity I so want you to have. This song is called In Christ Alone, and it tells the story, like Philippians 2 does, of what it is Jesus has done for us. It's a 4-minute and some odd second opportunity for us to stare at the good news of Jesus, to comprehend it, to internalize it, that we might live externally generous and externally brave. Would you please stand, and would you please sing together?